That was his intention. And the people who you are attacking also have to be essentially defenseless. They have to be people that aren't fighting you. They have to be people that you're simply attacking because you want to kill them. No? That being the case, we have to consider. Let's try the next slide and see. Yeah, okay. The next slide, the question of the Turks and the Armenians, whether these things actually apply. Were the Armenians essentially defenseless? Well, they sided with the Russians. They revolted and they took over cities militarily. Tens of thousands of Armenians fought against the Ottomans. Ottoman Armenians, also of course Russian Armenians. Guerrilla attacks, murder of Muslim civilians. So to say these people were essentially defenseless seems to be not just naive, but just plain wrong and perhaps a deliberate falsification of history. Did the Ottomans intend to destroy the entire group of Armenians? Well, I think that is pretty obviously not the case, since the ones who were most relocated by the Ottomans, more than 3/4 of them survived. These are people that are under the command of the Ottoman army. They could have been killed. They could have been killed at least in tremendous numbers, and they were not. In fact, the Ottomans even took supplies from soldiers. Jamal Pasha took supplies from soldiers and used them to feed the Armenians who went through Syria. So to say that this is the case seems rather unlikely. Armenians in the cities where they were considered to be no real danger, Izmir, Istanbul, Edirne, in these cities, none of them were relocated. They were left there. Now, to understand how important this is, if you want to really believe in genocide, try to think of Hitler leaving all the Jews of Berlin to live their lives with no problem. How likely is that? But the Turks, they left the Armenians there, except for some politicians. The worst Armenian and Muslim mortality was not in the areas where people were relocated, they were in the areas of war. And the reason for this was because for 3 years there were no crops put in the ground, there was starvation, there was massive disease, cholera, typhus, typhoid. Most of the people who died did not die because they were shot, they died because they died of disease and starvation. And that's true of Turks and Armenians and Kurds and all kinds of people in Eastern Anatolia. The Ottomans tried those who committed crimes against Armenians. Not all of them, they weren't completely successful, no question about it, but the Ottomans tried to do that. But most importantly, people have been searching for 100 years to find any evidence, real evidence, that the Ottomans ordered the murder of Armenians. We have thousands of documents where the Ottomans say, you've got to protect the Armenians, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Always successful? Absolutely not. Did the Ottomans fail? Absolutely, they failed. They failed to protect their own people, whether they were Muslims or Armenians. Because the main duty of a government has to be to defeat enemies, to keep your people safe, and the Ottomans failed in that. I don't know what else they could have done. The Russians had a bigger army that everybody's attacking them, but still, that was a failure. But whether they had any intent to kill Armenians, I mean, after the war, the British controlled the Ottoman archives. They had all the documents there, they had all the evidence, and they searched, and they searched, and they searched, and they found nothing. No one has ever found any real evidence. And in fact, all the evidence that we found is to the opposite. Thousands and thousands of documents that show two things. First of all, they show that sometimes the Ottomans were tremendously incompetent, and they made terrible mistakes. They would tell people to move one place and then to another. They would send protection, and then they'd take their protection away. I mean, lots of problems in that regard. It was the middle of a war. There were difficulties. But we also know that they intended to protect the Armenian columns. All the evidence indicates that. So to accuse them of genocide is, I think, just to ignore the facts. To accuse them of some incompetence, yes. To accuse them of not being able to defend their own people, yes. But to accuse them of being deliberate mass murderers, I think not. And I think that the more we would study those things, the more we would find that if there was a genocide, it was a mutual genocide and everyone did it. But as a historian, I think it's better we forget those words. The words just don't make any historical sense. And that was quite a bit for a genocide, wasn't it?
Thank you, Professor.